This is the logo of the Earth Summit. This is not a dove in their Earth Summit logo. It is a hand. And the hand is holding the world with the slogan, "In our hands," alongside of it. In whose hands? Who is the we in this motto? The hands of the world order. These elitists convened this unsaid meeting in the first place, and for a bad purpose. And for a bad purpose. And for a bad purpose.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. We're included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Momentous opening words of the Great Charter for World Peace. At San Francisco, 200 men and women of 50 nations labored to build an organization that will outlaw war for all time. The charter of mankind's deepest hopes. Humanity demands that this be the Magna Carta of lasting peace.
If we had had this charter a few years ago, and above all the will to use it, millions now dead would be alive.
The time has come for the world to move in a new direction.
And the president outlined his vision of a new world order in which the US would participate fully.
I'm Michael Berkowitz with 100 Resilient Cities. 100 RC is the Rockefeller Foundation's $100 million commitment to build urban resilience worldwide. We're going to announce the next cohort of cities.
Sydney, Australia.
All of you understand that our cities are a part of our greatest economic assets. This is where most Australians live. 75% of us live in our major cities and regional centres. This is where most of our GDP is derived. Livable cities, cities that work, are enormous economic assets. They are vitally important to our strong economy. Planning is absolutely critical. We've got to work together coherently, cohesively, federal government, state government, city governments, in developing these city deals. We want to have livable cities. We want to make sure that we have the public space, the green space. We want to ensure that we have the good transport infrastructure.
Good evening, I'm Rosa Corey. I'm the Executive Director of the Post-Sustainability Institute. And I'm glad to be here tonight. It's an important night because we're drawing something out of the shadows. And it's important to talk about it. This is Agenda 21. This is the United Nations plan. It's a 300-page, 40-chapter plan. And ICLEI was created in 1990 prior to this plan's adoption to implement United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development worldwide. Sustainable development is a term that was defined by the United Nations, and all of these terms come out of the United Nations. Smart growth is part of the United Nations Agenda 21. Your general plan elements are designed in accordance with United Nations Agenda 21 principles. The plan restricts your choices, it limits your ability to govern yourself, and it takes away your freedom. This seems like a rhetorical statement, but it really is not. This is actually what this plan does. And using the cover of environmental concern, our private property rights and our civil rights have been diminished, and they will continue to be so unless we call a halt to it. It's a United Nations plan. It's called the Agenda for the 21st Century.
It is the agenda for the 21st century you're living in today.
It is the inventory and control plan. Inventory and control of all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all food, all energy, all information, and all human beings in the world.
Agenda 21 defines itself as the comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally by organizations of the United Nations systems.
It also elevates nature above man, and it contains something called the precautionary principle, where basically you're guilty until you're proven innocent.
Sustainable development is the philosophy designed to bring human beings across the globe under the full control of a narrow human elite.
It's a 40-chapter document to basically control the world. It's based entirely on socialist control mechanisms.
And so many of us around the world think that, sustainable development, it just sounds so great. Isn't it about recycling and creative reuse and creating energy and food resources for everyone? And the answer is no, it really is not. It's about moving populations into city centers, concentrated city centers, and clearing them out of the rural areas.
Sustainable developers have designed a global movement coordinated through a global to local action plan to create world government in accordance with certain objectives. These objectives include an end to national sovereignty, the abolition of private property, the restructure of the family unit, and increasing limitations and restrictions on mobility and individual opportunity.
This is how it's implemented on the ground, is through this joining together between corporations, non-governmental organizations, and governments in order to cut out the actual individual, your voter, and instead to take that to a level where we literally cannot penetrate.
Those of you who are involved in the climate change issue know that it is the goal of the international community. Those who believe in the Rousseau socialist philosophy of governance, it is their chief objective to suppress truth in order for the propaganda to prevail that supports their power.
I first stumbled across Agenda 21 in about 2008. And quite frankly, my first reaction was to dismiss what I was reading, because I didn't believe that any government in Australia would take us down this road. Then I began to see a legislative pattern emerging in Parliament, which concerned me greatly. And I also started to see the tenor of legislation that we were passing. I did air those concerns in Parliament, and it was dismissed and ignored. The words Agenda 21, ladies and gentlemen, were never meant to be spoken. Because if people knew Agenda 21, and what it stood for. There's plenty of information out there where they could actually learn what the end game was, and governments didn't want that to be known. Ladies and gentlemen, the origins of the environmental movement as we see it began back in 1968 when the Club of Rome was formed. The Club of Rome has been described as a crisis think tank which specialises in crisis creation. The main purpose of this think tank was to formulate a crisis that would unite the world and condition us to the idea of global solutions to local problems.
I think very shortly you're going to have a great thrill when you see the actual design and plan for this great center.
I met Rockefeller through a female attorney I knew. He's the one who told me 11 months before 9/11 ever happened that there was going to be an event. Never told me what the event was going to be, but there was going to be an event, and out of that event, we were going to invade Afghanistan. We were going to invade Iraq, to take over the oil fields, establish a base in the Middle East, and make it all part of the New World Order. And sure enough, later 9/11 happened, and I remember he was telling me how you're gonna see soldiers looking in caves for people in Afghanistan and Pakistan and all these places, and there's gonna be this war on terror, of which there's no real enemy, and the whole thing is a giant hoax, but it's a way for the government to take over the American people. He says there's gonna be war on terror, and he's laughing. There's no, who are we fighting? 9/11 was done by people in our own government and our own banking system to perpetuate the fear of the American people into subordinating themselves to anything the government wants them to do, and to create this endless war on terror. And that was the first lie. And the next lie was going into Iraq to get Saddam Hussein out with his weapons of mass destruction. That was the next lie.
The world judged the Iraqi regime was a dangerous aggressor. In the interests of world peace and regional security, the community of nations required Iraq to surrender its offensive arsenal, its chemical and biological weapons, and abandon its nuclear weapons program. Iraq agreed to comply.
The world judged the Iraqi regime to be a dangerous aggressor. In the interests of world peace and regional security, the community of nations expelled Iraq from Kuwait, required Iraq to surrender its offensive arsenal, its chemical biological weapons, and to abandon its nuclear weapons program. Iraq agreed to comply. Iraq's continued defiance of the community of nations presents a challenge which must be addressed.
Presents a challenge which must be addressed. It is inherently dangerous
to allow a country such as
Iraq to retain weapons of mass destruction, particularly in the light of its past aggressive behaviour.
If the world community fails to disarm Iraq, we fear that other rogue states will be encouraged to believe that they too can have these weapons, these most deadly of weapons, to systematically comply with international resolutions, and that the world will do nothing to stop it.
In a document called The First Global Revolution, authored by Alexander King and Bertrand Schneider, on pages 104 and 105, it stated, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers, of course, will be caused by human intervention that will require a global response. That's the origin of global warming, ladies and gentlemen. It has been put to me that all of these treaties were the foundation for the rollout of Agenda 21. And now we're almost at checkmate. In 1992, former President of the United States, George Bush Sr. said, "Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. A major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human action will be integrated into individual and collective decision-making at every level." Cutting through the code, I want everyone to consider what the words "profound reorientation of all human society" and "unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources" actually means. For everyone here tonight not familiar with Agenda 21, I would suggest that this is the beginning of your learning curve, not the end. In 1992, Maurice Strong, Secretary General of the UN Earth Summit and member of the Club of Rome, said, "It is clear that current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class, involving high meat intake, consumption of large amounts of frozen and convenience foods, use of fossil fuels, ownership of motor vehicles, small electrical appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable." Put those statements together with the previous one, and it must become clear that Agenda 21 is about controlling every aspect of our lives: how we eat, what we eat, how much we eat, how we move around, food production, the amount of food, and where we even live. Dixie Ray, former Washington State Governor and Assistant Secretary for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, stated, "Agenda 21 seeks to establish a mechanism for transferring the wealth from citizens to the third world. Fear of environmental crisis would be used to create a world government and UN central direction." From a report in the 1976 UN's Habitat I conference, land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice. In a report from the President's Council on Sustainable Development, we need a new collaborative decision process that leads to better decisions, more rapid change, and more sensible use of human, natural and financial resources in achieving our goals. And at the same time, Harvey Reuven, Vice Chair of the Wildlands Project, says individual rights will have to take a back seat to the collective. J. Gary Lawrence, advisor to President Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development, participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy-fixated groups and individuals in our society, and here we are. This segment of our society, who fear one world government and UN invasion, through which our individual freedoms will be stripped away, would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy by undertaking Agenda 21. So we will call our process something else. We will call it comprehensive planning, or growth management, or smart growth. We ended up with sustainable development. The redeployment of human and financial resources has now become visible to us all via the cut to services and programs to assist the sick, the young, the elderly, and of course the creation of another level of poverty now identified by the term the working poor. I was speaking to a person last week and he said to me, if Hitler was still around, he'd be sitting back thinking, I didn't need bullets for a global takeover. And he'd be right. We see daily cash grabbing via new taxes called levies, supposedly because we are cash strapped in this state, and at the same time see big project spending that does not fit with the message that we're in financial crisis. But we the people have to tighten our belt, while the government seems absolutely unaware and unconcerned of the amount of debt that it is accumulating. This in turn means that taxes, levies, fines and other penalties increase, as well as the cost of living rising exponentially, and the ordinary citizen's ability to exist well is compromised with almost every law that we pass. We're constantly paying for so-called services that we don't receive. This is wealth redistribution at the grassroots level, redeployment of financial resources, ensuring only hardship for the citizens who just really want to get on with their lives. The Parliament has also ventured into the rights of people to own and retain their property and manage it without government interference. In particular, the laws around, as Peter said, water allocation, natural resource management, the Native Vegetation Act, Development and Planning Act, which are all equally toxic to our food producers as they are to our long-term security, we city dwellers. Everyone needs to remember, we all pay a natural resource management levy on our tax rates. So this is not just going to affect the food producers. The intrusions into our property that Peter was talking about that land producers are going through will roll out into the suburbs and into the city because they have the authority to do that. As Agenda 21 became more and more apparent to me, I began using the line in Parliament that government was now declaring war on its own citizens. And that goes back as far as 2008. This, of course, led me to being labelled a conspiracy theorist. But here we are now, openly talking about Agenda 21 and the ramifications we will see in a short period of time if this is not stopped in its tracks. In 1972, the Club of Rome published the Alarmist Limits to Growth document, warning of worldwide overpopulation, the need for sustainable development. This was the beginning of the slow process of social engineering and programming people to accept that the planet is struggling to sustain life. On the 8th of October 1973, the New York Times reported a quote from Ted Turner, also Club of Rome. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. In 1987, Mikhail Gorbachev, also a member of Club of Rome, said, "We are moving toward a new world order, the world of communism, and we shall never turn off that road." He also quoted in 1996 Monetary and Economic Review on page 5, "The environmental crisis will be the international disaster that will unlock the new world order, one world government." In 1992 came the Earth Summit, which produced the document called the Earth Charter. This document was co-written by Maurice Strong, long-time globalist, elitist, member of Club of Rome, and Mikhail Gorbachev. Both Strong and Gorbachev stated that it was hoped that this document would be adopted as the new 10 Commandments, with environmentalism as the new one world religion. Out of this summit came Agenda 21. Ted Turner, who is also a member of the Club of Rome, was quoted as saying in 1996, "The total population of 250 to 300 million people is ideal. That means a reduction of 95% from present levels would be even more ideal." In 1998, the Baltimore Sun reported on July the 7th, most of Ted Turner's first donation to the UN of $22 million went to programs that seek to stall population. Another goal of the depopulation process is that the upcoming generation will submit to sterilisation to save Mother Earth. Ladies and gentlemen, everything I've said here tonight can be verified by document searches.
The green goal includes the listings of what's not sustainable. A couple of the examples include private property.
728 lists fossil fuels.
Golf courses and ski lodges are not.
Consumerism.
Irrigation is not sustainable.
Paved roads.
Commercial agriculture.
Herbicides, pesticides. Elsewhere, it lists farmlands. pastures, grazing of livestock,
and the family unit. I sat on the Santa Cruz Agenda 21 committees. Now, this was a lot of crazy ideas. This was back in the mid-90s. Crazy ideas I heard. Mother Earth's surface wasn't to be scratched. Human beings were to be concentrated into human settlement zones. Educational systems were to focus on the environment as the central organizing principle. All aspects of life were covered.
$112 bushfires burning right across the state.
In an emergency, you change your behavior. And without that sense of urgency, how can we, the people, understand that we are facing a real crisis?
Some 11,000 scientists from around the world have banded together to warn of untold suffering if major transformations to the way we live don't take place.
The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming appallingly evident. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population.
$10 billion over the next 10 years to make it the year of the vaccines. What does that mean exactly?
Well, over this decade, we believe unbelievable progress can be made, both inventing new vaccines and making sure they get out to all the children who need them. The benefits there in terms of reducing sickness, reducing the population growth.
Leaving Microsoft, Bill Gates bought $23 million of Monsanto shares. Globally, he now promotes GMOs and a vaccines collection he calls the solution for the world. Gates has been recorded explaining this solution is actually to cut the world's population.
Now, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
I want to emphasize this. The biggest issue in 20 years will be population collapse.
On today's weather now, and Tony, something strange going on in the skies of southern Queensland in the past day.
Good afternoon, Katrina. Yes, we've started seeing some mysterious echoes appearing on the radar. Now, they started late yesterday afternoon over the Darling Downs with trails of blue sweeping across the southeast during the evening and overnight before it all dissipated early this morning. So, what is it? Well, it's not weather-related. Skies were clear last night and there was no rain recorded anywhere. Now, one theory is that it's a thing called chaff, small metal or plastic fibres released into the air to help shield military aircraft from radar detection during exercises. No one has confirmed that, but these streams here are consistent with something being released in the upper atmosphere.
Materials that are going into the environment right now, aluminum oxide nanoparticles and barium nanoparticles, these just happen to be the same materials that they use in nanothermate explosives. And so when this stuff settles down out of the air into the environment, it is small enough to be absorbed through the root structure of the trees in the forest. And so when there's a forest fire, and there will be a forest fire, those fires burn dramatically hotter.
For generations, Australians have dreamt of building a fast train between Sydney and Melbourne, and a private company says it now has the plan to make it happen. The $200 billion project would see 8 new inland cities built along the route, and a journey between the two capitals would take under 2 hours. For ambition, it's been likened to the snowy hydroelectric scheme.
You know it's a big pitch when it starts with a JFK speech.
We stand today on the edge of a new frontier.
And follows with an even bigger promise.
This is a project that can literally change the arc of your country.
A fast rail not only connecting Sydney and Melbourne, but opening inland Australia.
I'm confident this is the best project that Australia has seen to achieve fast rail between Melbourne and Sydney.
The company, Clara, plans to make it happen by building inland cities along the way.
We envisage them being between 100 and 200,000 dwellings.
They'd buy farmland for, say, $1,000 a block and sell it as a house lot for, say, $150,000. The difference pays for the city infrastructure and the high-speed train.
Stage 1 is from Melbourne to Greater Shepparton.
Built 8 inland cities that way, the high-speed rail connecting Melbourne, Canberra and Sydney through those new regional hubs. If this is all sounding familiar, that's because every federal government since 1980 has considered a fast train, and each time the economics just didn't stack up. So what makes this time any different? This time, the plan is backed by the CSIRO, RMIT, GE, and a man who advised Bill Clinton and Barack Obama.
Do not let anybody tell you it can't be done.
What's happening is you get people like the Rockefellers, or the Tavistock Institute. What they're doing is they're funding the cities, and they're getting the cities to adopt these resilient city norms. They basically hijacked our major cities where there's big populations. There are things they have in plan to force people off their land to come into the city. One thing that they have in mind is to make it look like water is scarce, because they're promoting this false idea that water is a limited resource, and it's not. It's a renewable resource. So they want to do it that way so they can then suck the water out of the water table, let's say. That's what they're wanting to do. Suck the water out of the water table, and then you won't have water on your land, and then they can come in there and they can declare your land as uninhabitable and take it.
There's frack wells all over the place. If you look up reports, you'll find that there's 43,000 frack wells in Australia. Each one of these wells uses between 1.5 to 16 million gallons of water. This is one of the driest countries on earth, and this is what they're doing with our water supply. This has all been manufactured, and this has served to dry the country out.
Kilometres of the greatest river system is empty, and it's not drought. Floodplain harvesting means where there was floodplains, they kill all the trees, level it off, and they put a big embankment to stop the water actually getting into the river, and they call that harvesting. I'm calling that rape of a river.
Welcome to what's left of the Darling River.
Come and see it. Come and bring your kids fishing. Let them walk up and down this river and find 50 million dead mussels, yabbies, emus, roos, everything. The whole ecosystem has collapsed, and the trees, they're just dying. Australians have to wake up.
For Australian farmers battling one of the worst droughts of all time, water is more precious than gold. So how would they, and the rest of us who depend on them for food, react knowing government authorities, whose job it is to manage our water, are wasting millions and millions of litres of it, deliberately? On the Upper Murray River, water that could save farmers is spilling over the banks. Enough to fill 2 Sydney harbours was lost last year alone. It's a national scandal unfolding in secret. In August last year, the gates opened on dams along the Upper Murray River. They wouldn't close for 141 days. It let loose a man-made flood.
16,000 megs a day spilling through the Yarrawonga Weir.
It's scarcely believable, but while much of Australia was gripped by one of our worst droughts in history, the people who manage our most precious resource were wasting it in truly epic proportions. Millions of litres of water flooding a protected national forest, while a dairy industry dies in the heat.
We're in a man-made drought. Our water is flowing past us every single day and we can't touch it.
Just over the horizon is the Murray River. Despite the terrible drought, its dams are over 50% full. And guess what? The river is even flooding over its banks and being wasted. But the bureaucrats back in Sydney and Canberra who manage the Murray still claim there's not enough water to go around. So much water wasted.
It's a tragedy. It's horrifying.
You can see it from space.
Dams that are being built, private dams that are being built for major agri companies. 2 of these dams cost taxpayers nearly $30 million, and these are private dams. The politicians don't want to talk about these dams because they do nothing for drought-stricken communities. Politicians are reluctant to talk about why millions of taxpayer dollars have been spent on subsidising dams that make the problems of the Murray-Darling Basin worse. You know, these dams are being done intentionally to waste water, and it's illegal. These dams are all illegal. The water harvesting is illegal. The floodplain harvesting is illegal. So what they're doing by diverting the water from getting into the river is they are abridging the right of people downstream to the use of this water. This has all been manufactured, and this has served to dry the country out.
Look, what is global warming? Too much CO2? No, it's not, because you have a perfect balance of CO2 in the biosphere. And it's always the same. It's so many parts per million of CO2. If there's more CO2 in the biosphere, it'll get absorbed by the plant. I mean, nature is comprised of feedback systems all over the place. So you're never going to have too much CO2.
It's not the result of incompetence, it's deliberate. Fire services haven't got the money that they're supposed to have. Government simply isn't funding them to even do the job they're supposed to do. They appear to be pushing the clouds away. There appears to be some type of electromagnetic interference. It honestly does very much look like the HAARP activity that we've so often witnessed, which is pushing the clouds out of the region.
The chemtrails are being used in conjunction with HAARP. By spraying metal oxides into the air above enemy skies, then directing ELF waves from HAARP to heat those metal oxides, the temperature of the sky is raised to more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit, preventing the accumulation of water vapor that would otherwise form clouds and produce rainfall.
That it's a thing called chaff, small metal or plastic fibres released into the air to help shield military aircraft from radar detection during exercises.
Some 11,000 scientists from around the world have banded together to warn of untold suffering if major transformations to the way we live don't take place.
Students around the world are marching in yet another huge global school strike.
World leaders are going to be gathered here in New York City for the United Nations Climate Action Summit.
$112 bushfires burning right across the state. The government's recovery mission is now well underway. Prime Minister Scott Morrison announces a $2 billion fund to help rebuild those hard-hit areas.
One of the most significant, if not most significant, response to a crisis of this kind that the country has seen.
As the Minister said, she's asked me to convene an expert panel who will help guide the government's response to this bushfire crisis. This expert panel will have a few roles. We'll be looking at trying to assess the impacts of these fires on our threatened species and our wildlife and our plants and animals, mapping to try to understand where the fires have been and which species may have been in their path has already begun.
It is the inventory and control plan. Inventory and control of all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all food, all energy, all information, and all human beings in the world.
It also elevates nature above man.
And also there's the planning for that long-term habitat restoration effort. So I'm convening this panel. It'll include experts from CSIRO, from the universities.
This time, the plan is backed by the CSIRO, RMIT, GE, and a man who advised Bill Clinton and Barack Obama.
Do not let anybody tell you it can't be done.
This morning we are celebrating the news. The biggest names in music, both at home and abroad, are uniting to raise funds for victims of the bushfire crisis. The world's top rockers will be hitting the stage at ANZ Stadium in Sydney, where we
Well, the fury over how the Red Cross has been distributing bushfire donations has dominated the week's news. And despite bushfire victims still living in caravans, tents and even cars on the south coast and the north coast, the Red Cross maintains that it's handed out $30 million in donations and the rest will be required over the next 3 years for rebuilding purposes.
The heavens have finally opened, Sydney copping its biggest drenching in months. Right now, rain is still falling in areas right across the city.
How dare you?
awful lot from Mr. Rockefeller. And one of the things that we used to talk about was the ultimate plan of the banking industry, what they wanted to accomplish. And the goals of the banking industry, not just the Federal Reserve System, but the private banks in Germany and England, all over Italy, all over the world, they all work together. They're all central banks, and they're all part of the Communist Manifesto. You know, central banking is one of the major planks of the Communist Manifesto. We talk about America being a capitalistic country, but yet at the same time we have a central bank that plans everything for us, right? And the graduated income tax is another plank of the Communist Manifesto, right? So right there you have two major planks of the Communist Manifesto that have been brought in because of the Federal Reserve System. The ultimate goal that these people have in mind is the goal to create a one world government run by the banking industry, run by the bankers.
As the world's becoming increasingly digitized and hyper-connected, this new economy requires a new finance to serve the digital economy.
Right, there'll be no more cash. And this is given me straight from Rockefeller himself. This is what they want to accomplish.
First, to enable the digital economy, the very nature of commerce is changing. Use of cash has declined from 2/3 of all payments a decade ago to only 1/4 today. And that made sense in an old world arranged around a series of hubs and spokes, but it's increasingly anachronistic in the new distributed finance that's emerging. Implementing a system whereby each payment will be tagged with information in a standardized format across the world. Now, the potential for transformation in retail payments is enormous, you know that. I'll give one example, stablecoins.
Facebook going full crypto, unveiling its new digital currency Libra today, the start of what the social giant calls the Internet of Money to rebuild a reliable and global financial infrastructure.
Stablecoins have the potential to substantially improve financial inclusion. To dramatically lower the costs of domestic and cross-border payments.
The ultimate goal that these people have in mind is the goal to create a one world government run by the banking industry. The whole agenda is to create a one world government.
Dobbiamo costruire questo villaggio in modo che in questo villaggio nasca una convergenza globale per un'alleanza tra gli abitanti della terra e la casa. Un villaggio universale, ma un villaggio anche personale di ognuno.
A one world government where everybody has an RFID chip implanted in them.
Well, Elon Musk's next project isn't a car or a spaceship or a solar panel. The executive's latest startup is called Neuralink, which focuses on the goal of implanting chips into human brains.
We can solve that with a chip. This is what the chip looks like.
All money is to be in those chips, right? There'll be no more cash. And all money will be in your chips. Instead of having cash, anytime you have money in your chip, they can take out whatever they want to take out whenever they want to. If they say you owe us this much money in taxes, they just deduct it out of your chip digitally. And if you're like me or you, and you're protesting what they're doing, they can just turn off your chip. And you have nothing. You can't buy food. You can't do anything. It's total control of the people.
It concerns me. I love what you're doing, but when we say we at Facebook are going to set the social policies of who can use this cryptocurrency, in a way we're going to set the social policy of who's in and who's out.
All your money in those chips, and they control the chips, and they control people, and you become a slave. You become a serf.
Basically, it's meant as a tool to enforce all kinds of different laws, regulations, and other policies more effectively by getting people to self-police their behavior. People and also legal entities.